Hey guys, it's Jacolia of Jacolia Gems. Thank you for once again coming back to view my channel. If you are new here, welcome. If you are returning, hey y'all. If you have not already done so, go ahead and do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. And thank you to those of you who have already subscribed. Now do me a favor, turn on your post notifications so that you are alerted each and every time I upload a video, as well as the few times that I decide to go live. Last but not least, do me a favor also and like this video. It'll definitely help me out in the algorithm. So today I'm not going to be on screen much. This is going to be more so of a teaching video. I want to delve into the sexualization of the Black woman and some practices that we have picked up on. Definitely going to talk about Black men, going to delve into phallic worship, horse worship, touch in on some pagan practices, as well as to give out some scripture. I'm going to play some videos from a European pagan himself. He's a proud pagan. I'm also going to have some scripture of showing the Passover versus the Catholic Eucharist and how we ended up going from Passover to communion and how communion practices reflect some of the practices that I'm going to show you guys, as well as tie in how modern day feminism mixed with these pagan practices all lead back to Babylon and to Rome, Catholicism, Islam, so on and so forth. So this is going to be a meaty video. With that being said, I'm going to just jump straight into it. So the first video that I'm going to start off going into is from Survive the Jive. He is an anthropologist and he teaches on European culture. He teaches on European DNA, the Indo-European, the Proto-Europeans, the Indo-Aryans. He teaches on the customs of the Celtics and the Gauls and just the different type of European people, and explaining how they are not all created the same and that they are actually new as far as the nations of people. So in this video, it's about 42 minutes. Clearly, I'm not going to play this entire video. He talks about horse sacrifices amongst different cultures. Horses were sacrificed in so many different cultures in the Eurasian people groups. And so in the beginning of the video, he began to talk about the Vedics. And so right now I fast forwarded some and we're going to focus on Rome. Now, if this video starts to lag too much, then I'll likely just chop it down in segments. But we will see exactly what happens because for some reason my connection has been messing up. So I do apologize in advance. So now we're just going to go ahead and focus on Rome and the sacrifices of horses in the Roman culture.
Pioneer of comparative Indo-European mythology, Georges de Neuville argued convincingly that the Roman rite called October Horse preserved remnants of a common Indo-European ritual linked to kingship, which was analogous to the Vedic Ashvamedha, and also to the Irish equivalent. The October Horse was a sacrifice for the god Mars, held on the Campus Martius in Rome each year on the 15th of October. We have 4 accounts of it from Polybius, Plutarch, Festus, and Paulus Diaconus. The right-hand horse from the winning pair in a chariot race was sacrificed with a spear, and according to both Plutarch and Festus, its tail was carried to the Regia, where it was used to bloody the altar stone, so that it shared the sacrifice. The severed head of the horse was fought over by competing factions from Subera and Sacravia. The necessity of it being the right-hand horse of the chariot is reflected in India too, where it is written that the Ashvamedha victim must excel on the right part of the yoke. The tail also plays a similar role in the Ashvamedha. Vedic Indra, being associated with the Kshatriya caste, can be seen as equivalent to the Roman war god Mars in some ways too. There is even an equivalence to the human sacrifice of Purushamedha, which also proves October horse has an association with kingship. Caesar revived the long-forgotten human sacrifice version of the October horse in preparation for his plan to restore monarchy. The substitution of a human victim for the horse was evidently possible in the original Indo-European rite. Pausanias describes a funerary horse sacrifice in ancient Greece, in which Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, made his stepdaughter Helen's suitors stand upon the pieces of the sacrificed horse and swear oaths to protect her. Here again we see it is the king who sacrifices the horse, and there is a sexual element too. In Greek myth we see a divine horse rape, when Demeter transformed into a mare to evade the lusty Poseidon, until he turned into a stallion and raped her. She then became pregnant with the horse called Arion. Greeks sacrificed white horses to Poseidon and to the sun, and white mares were sacrificed at the graves of young women who had been raped and subsequently committed suicide. The Greek historian Herodotus is one of the only sources we have on the religion of the Scythians, a nomadic steppe people of the Iron Age who descended from the Bronze Age Syntashta culture I mentioned earlier. He says they sacrificed horses as part of a king's funeral. The entire scene was replicated in the recent Kazakh film Tomiris. Herodotus says the Scythians buried their king with one of his concubines, who they strangled to death, also his wine server, his cook, his horse groom, and his messenger, and a number of horses and valuable possessions. The account is validated by archaeological evidence, such as this Iron Age Scythian barrow, which included horse inhumation. The account bears a striking resemblance to the aforementioned Arabic account of a Viking king's funeral written some 1400 years later, and which not only included horse sacrifice, but also the ritual strangling of a slave girl who was first raped. I should remind you that the male human victim of the Purushamedha was also strangled to death, and then the queen raped his dead body. I wouldn't be surprised if Herodotus neglected to mention that the Scythians also raped their king's concubine prior to killing her, as this seems to have been an original element of the Indo-European ritual.
So for this part of the video, we're going to stop right here. It's some more important stuff. The reason I wanted to go briefly into the Roman practices as well as the Grecian practices and the Scythians is because these people were written to by the Apostle Paul, and a lot of their beliefs end up being mixed and mingled in with some historians called Christianity, quote unquote, or the beliefs of the Christian Israelites. When I say Christian Israelites, it's the Israelites who adopted the belief of who Christ was and is. And then there is some schisms amongst them and the Israelites whom did not yet accept Christ as their Mashiach, as some small Israelite populations that were located in Eurasia and in the Indus Valley as well. So now we're going to get into some of the Odin practices, and Odin is a god that is very prominent. If you guys watch anything that has to do with graphic novels, you'll see that Odin is one of the main characters in the movie Thor, and that's his son.
H. Adam also describes how the Swedes held an enormous sacrifice at the temple of Uppsala, which involved the ritual hanging of 9 male animals from every species available, including horses.
I want you guys to also know that the number 9 is very, very important when it comes to a lot of cultures around the world. But when it comes to Odin, I believe he's going to say in his video, Odin is called the hanging god, and he is believed to have died 8 times. Then on the 9th time, he rose again after he hung and pierced himself. Let's continue.
This seems to have been an offering to Odin, the god of the hanged. Thietmar of Merseburg wrote of the pagan activities in Lejre, Denmark in the early 10th century, as in Uppsala, the worshippers gathered every 9th year. The sacrifice involved 99 people and 99 horses, dogs, and cocks. This same sacrificial formula of 9 is seen in the Stentoften runes dated to 600 AD, which has billy goats with 9 horses, gave Hathulf a good year. Odin specifies in Horrible that he hangs for 9 nights as a sacrifice to himself. So again, the number 9 indicates this was an Odinic rite. A lesser known written source for Norse the blood is sprinkled on the sacred tree in Uppsala. Horse sacrifices were also common in funerary contexts, and this is supported not only by archaeology, but by an account from the 10th century Arabic emissary of the Emir of Baghdad, Ibn Fadlan. He describes how 2 horses were run until sweaty, and were then cut up with a sword and placed in a boat with other animals and a slave girl. The girl has ritual sex with each of her lord's men prior to the horse sacrifice, and is then raped again after the horses are killed, before she herself is stabbed by a priestess and simultaneously strangled by the lord's men. All the sacrificial victims were then burned and finally buried. This account bears a close resemblance to archaeological evidence of Norse funerals. The way they drove the horses until they were sweaty and then sacrificed them, and then raped the slave girl, is structurally similar to the sexual rites of the horse sacrifice in the Ashvamedha and the Scythian example I mentioned earlier.
Okay, guys, so this is what I want to begin to draw the connection into, is the fact that sex is a part of these rituals with these animals. And when we look at animals and sacrifices, when they are killed, it's to go to a specific deity. There are rituals in order to sacrifice specific gods, specific powers of specific cultures. That's why you have to have certain type of food, certain type of animals, certain type of liquors, certain type of enchantment, certain type of drummings and languages and things of that nature in order to invoke the presence of these different gods. And so when we see that this is taking place, I know it sounds like some eyes wide shut stuff where women are being raped and then sacrificed. So we're going to continue, and then I'm going to read off a little bit about the power of 9 with the Norse mythology.
The clearest example of the royal Indo-European horse sacrifice in Norse sources comes from the saga of King Håkon the Good in Heimskringla. It depicts the Yule festivities in Trondheim in Norway.
Actually, I'll read out the Power of Nine because I definitely want to touch in on that Yule time, because that's something that we actually have adopted practices to in the Black community when we are celebrating Christmas, as well as some other customs that we have picked up. So even if it isn't during Yule time, it is definitely present, and I'm going to show you guys the hows and the whys. So the number 9 is also a significant number in Norse cosmology and the Anglo-Saxon paganism. And so we see that the number 9 is used a lot when it comes to the worship of these he goats and the 9 stallions, as he was saying that it had to be a specific number that was sacrificed to these gods in order to invoke their presence. And so when we even, I'm going to link down below some of the sacrifices that these other cultures begin to pick up on when it comes to horse sacrifices. And in this video that I was playing, he actually goes in and starts talking about the sacrifice that takes place between the queen with this horse. And so when he brings in Yule time, we're going to let him talk about that.
During the 950s AD, which it was apparently essential the king participated in. Many kinds of animals are sacrificed there, but only horses are specifically mentioned. It is also the sacrificial horse meat which causes a major dispute between the people and their Christian king when he refuses to eat it. The saga explains that the blood of the animals was collected in bowls and then sprinkled on the congregation and the hall itself with special sticks, but that the meat was all cooked for a feast. The sprinkling of blood in this way can also be seen in the Roman cult of Mithras, or in the feast scene in the Odyssey, in which blood is the means by which the dead may be revived and communicated with.
Okay, y'all, so this is where it gets a little exciting for me, at least. I know some of y'all gonna be like, really? But if you're a Bible geek, then stay tuned in. It's gonna be a lot of jumping around, but y'all gonna get it. So when we look at the slaughtering of animals in conjunction with it becoming a covenant with the king, that's what they believe in this culture. So that is something that we definitely begin to see in the Bible under Hebraic culture, which is why it was so easy for these other cultures to come in and begin to synchronize their beliefs with ours. And so when you read Exodus, the 24th chapter, okay, then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel, you are to worship at a distance. But Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up. So this is when the laws were being given out to the 70 elders, and he was giving them the instructions, okay? And so when we scroll down and when he begins to come out of the mountain, we begin to see that he takes the blood. So we're going to continue to read, but Moses alone is to approach, as I read, the Lord. The others may not come near, and the people may not come up on him. But Moses went up and told the people all the Lord's words and the laws. They responded with one voice. Everything the Lord has said, we will do. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. So this is mountaintop theology, and this is seen in many, many, many cultures. You can see this in native cultures all over the world, whether it's Amazonian, whether it's Native American, whether it's in the Caribbean. You can also see this in ancient Egypt, in Near Eastern culture. When I say Near Eastern culture, I am talking about North Africa. A lot of the West African tribes have Near Eastern or Eastern origins. You can see this in ancient Egypt, which is a Near Eastern culture, Assyria, Near Eastern culture, where they have their pyramids or their mounds or their mountains where they go up to consult the deities. You can also see this in Indo-European cultures, and this is the beliefs of those who worship gods such as Thor. They believe that when you go into the mountaintop and you do certain rituals, that the gods will come down and commune with you. And so then he set young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offering and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." So, wait a minute. This video just said that in Norse and Celtic and the Gauls, that they began to take the blood of the horse, and they were upset that the king, that their Christian king, would not eat the horse meat. If he was a Christian, quote unquote, king, even if he was a European, it's because he knew that the meat was unclean, but he still took part in this ritual. And there's a reason behind it. And this is part of the synchronization when it comes to idol worship. And now, what we are going to do is get into some more scriptures to talk about how we have delved into the same practices that I just played out in this video. So, in the Old Testament, we are going to get into explaining the Passover and how it is supposed to look in comparison with how it looks today, and if what is going on today has remnants of some Celtic and some pagan practices. So the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt. And so this is going to be able to tell you that Passover can be kept in your homes. You do not need a temple for Passover to be kept. You do not need that. So come on. We're choosing, as Mama Ray likes to say, Divine Prospect of Kingdom Harbinger Ministries, um, doctrine over dogma. So this month is to be for you the first month of the year. And so whenever the Israelites were in captivity, much like today, our calendars got thrown off, and we ended up adopting calendars of the people whom we were under. Now, when we look at the origins of the calendar, I have an article on that as well. The first calendar actually originated in ancient Sumer. This is the same place where the Israelites were taken out of. And so when they entered into Canaan, their calendar was thrown off when they were in ancient Egypt. And so when they were leaving out of bondage, the Most High had them to reinstitute their calendar to be Abib. Abib is counted based up on the spring equinox and the new moon. If the new moon falls before the spring equinox, then you're going to have 13 months. This is a leap year, which is still practiced over in Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians have Hebraic roots in them because they came out of Abraham and Keturah. Okay? This is what Pastor Lanny likes to call learning on your way to learning something. And I'll link down both of those Morays, some of their videos down below as well. And so then the Passover, when the spring equinox falls before, I'm sorry, when the new moon falls before the spring equinox, then Passover has to be accounted for. So then it's 2 months. It's the 12th month and the 13th month. First Adar and second Adar. Then you have Abib. Now, if the spring equinox falls after, if the new moon falls after the spring equinox, then you are fine with just the 12 months. And so the Passover was instituted after the new month had started, right? And so in here it said, tell the community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man shall take a lamb for his house, one of each. If any house is too small for a whole lamb, they must share with one of their nearest neighbors. So basically, not even basically, everyone had to have a lamb. Everyone had to have a sacrifice. If the household was too small or too poor, then this is when the neighbors begin to come together, like the word begins to say. Having taken into account of the number of people there are, you are determined to the amount of lamb in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the he-goats. So if you remember that during the plagues, that the firstborn of the Egyptians were taken, but also when you look into the New Testament, there was a prophecy that went forth when the Persian or Chaldean, based upon what you believe, Magi came into ancient Egypt because they were astronomers and they began to look at the signs in the sky because prophecies were giving out in the Near East whenever a special child was to be born. We see this in the book of Isaiah when people use a lot of these prophecies as messianic, when they were truly talking about the sons of Haggai and these prophets and Isaiah and his wife. I digress. So when they began to look at the sky and use this, it's because all of these Near Eastern people use the elements in order to begin to set their calendars. And so then it begins to talk about the defects. And so when Herod began to go after the Mashiach, it's because he wanted to go after the males that were being born through that time, to slaughter them. And Christ had to flee down into Egypt to fulfill the prophecies that said, I brought my son, my firstborn, out of Egypt. This is dual because we will see that right here, the Israelites were brought out of ancient Egypt. Okay, y'all? So let's keep up. And so in verse 6, it's talking about take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Okay, I'm not going to get into twilight and nautical twilight and all of that. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of their door frames of the houses and where they eat lambs. So hoodoo practitioners do this a lot. They will take blood of some type of animal, normally a chicken or a pigeon, and they will sprinkle it across the doorpost. Voodoo practitioners will do this when they do the same thing, and sometimes they will use a goat or they will use some type of black pig. These are Hebraic markers that will begin to reveal to you who the children of Israel currently is, based upon the practices that they still have. The same night they are to eat the meat, roast over the fire along with bitter herbs, and make bread without yeast, because yeast represents sin. This is what the Apostle Paul was talking about when he was talking about unleavened bread. And the Apostle Paul, which we are going to end up showing, he kept the feast days. So there was no leaven to be found amongst the Israelites in their houses and in their quarters after Passover, because the angel of death had to be able to pass over their homes, and they are found to be without gall. So that's what the Feast of Unleavened Bread represented throughout those 7 days. You are to be found without sin. Just like in end time prophecy, when before the 8th day, which represents the Day of Atonement, which represents the circumcision, which represents the sky rolling back and being without sin, it's because for those 7 days you are supposed to be without sin, and on that 8th day you are atoning. So we see that during the Passover, this is what they had to do. They had to get a lamb. They had to cut it. They had to take the blood and sprinkle it, eat parts of the lamb with bitter herbs, and make unleavened bread. They cannot eat the meat raw or boil it in water, but they have to roast it with fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it until morning. If it is left until morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat: with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. They had to do this thing quickly, could not leave anything until morning, okay? And it's for a reason. On the same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on the gods of Egypt. That's a lesson right there. And I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you in your house where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destruction plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. So when we are singing the songs, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. But we don't keep Passover in the Christian church. We're going to talk about what's kept in the Christian church and how it has absolutely nothing to do with the Old Testament custom of Passover, and we began to call it communion. But where do we get communion from? Like, what is this? Did Christ keep Passover? Did he take communion? Like, what's going on? So we're going to go to the famous New Testament, and we're going to read Mark, the 24th. Mark 14. And I'm going to skim, as you guys see. So the setting reads as such: after 2 days was the feast of Passover and of unleavened bread. Now, when we're reading in the New Testament, it's very important to know that this is written from a Greco-Roman standpoint. And so, out of a lot of captivities, Nicosean councils, Chaldean councils, and things of that nature, a lot of the holy days were mixed in together. And even after the many translations, which we'll touch on just a little bit, some of our words were taken out. Like, for example, one time in the New Testament, it says Easter instead of Passover, and that's for a reason. And so that's important to know, because Passover and unleavened bread are not the same thing. After 2 days was the feast of Passover and unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they may take him by craft and put him to death. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. See, they knew that it was a feast day. And being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat, ate meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment, and spikenard is very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. So there was an argument and uproar about her anointing the Mashiach, and there were burial customs in the Near East. And so then they began to talk about verse 12, and the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, where wilt thou that we go, and that we may eat the Passover? Wait a minute, they're trying to kill him, and he knows this, right? Because in verse 11, it says, and when they heard, they were glad and promised him money, and he saw how he may conveniently betray him. Well, they knew all of this was going on. Well, Christ knew it was going on, is what I'm saying. Christ knew what was going on, and he called it out. But what was their focus? To eat the Passover. And he sent forth two of his disciples and said unto them, Go ye into the city, and there shall meet your young man a pitcher of water. Follow him. A man had a pitcher of water. And wheresoever he shall go in, say ye to the good men of the house, and master saith, Where is the guest chambers? Well, I shall eat the Passover with my disciples. So he wanted to keep the Passover, right? This was a must. This was a custom. People call this the Last Supper. This was the Passover. And his disciples came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. And in the evening he come with the 12. Okay. And this is when he calls out Judas, and it was revealed. And he told them to take it, to remember him. This is about to be symbolic, y'all, because I'm about to die. And the blood of the New Testament, and that's going to be a separate lesson on its own if we are in the New Testament fully. What is this New Testament theology we speak about? We're going to get into that. And so as we see, we just laid the foundation to prove that the Mashiach kept Passover. He had the lamb, okay? He had the bread. He had the wine. He had all of that. And that was not what it is that we take on today. Let's see what he said. And we're going to get into why. And I'm gonna go here with the book of Matthew. And maybe this is going to help tie some things together, because he still kept the Passover, right? And some people believe that we don't keep Passover anymore because there is no temple. Some people don't even recognize what it is to say that there is no temple. And so when the disciples began to ask him about the destruction of the temple and the signs of the time, said Jesus left the temple and was walking away. When his disciples came up to call him up, his attention to the buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. And Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they say, when will this happen? And what will the signs of your coming and the end of the age? And so he began to tell them, watch out, that no man's deceived you. There's going to be wars, rumor of wars, false prophets. Many will come in his name, saying that they are the Mashiach. He begins to talk and says, so when you see standing in the holy place, the abomination that caused the desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel. So he begins to talk about the end time, right? But let's focus on this first verse, these first few verses, when he begins to say that not one stone will be left. Okay. He was talking about the destruction of the temple. And the destruction of the temple took place in 70 AD. So now we're going to touch into just a little history to begin to tie all of this in, because it's important that we know. Here we go. The Siege of Jerusalem. So the Siege of Jerusalem, this is what this was talking about. This is the first Israelite and Roman war, and it was 3 days before Passover in 70 AD. And we should all be able to know, whenever the Israelites got ransacked, where did they go? They would always go into Africa. So there should be no arguments over where majority of the Israelites went after the ransack of the temple in Romans. And so now we're going to get into some more biblical facts as to why it is important to know that the Mashiach was letting them know that there would not be a temple for sacrifice any longer. This does not mean that the laws were done away with, because the Mashiach himself even said that heaven and earth will pass away before a jot or a tittle, which are letters in the Hebraic um alphabet, be before his laws pass away. So what law was being talked about when Paul was writing? It's very important to know that in the time of Christ, he was baptized by John the Baptist. Okay. And John the Baptist was a Levite through his father Zacharias and through his mother Elizabeth, and he was a cousin of the Mashiach. And so the reason that it is important to know this is because in the Old Testament, there were priestly divisions that were broken down. And when the Levites left their charge, which we'll get into, what began to happen is that the Zadoks took over, and the 24 elders, which is talked about in the book of Revelation, is actually part of the Zadoks. Okay. And so when John the Baptist began to baptize Christ, he actually was initiating him into the Melchizedekian priesthood that David was a part of. I'm a priest forever. You are a priest forever after the order of the Melchizedek. And so we see in Ezekiel 44 and 15, but the Levitical priests who are descendants of Zadok and who guarded my sanctuary when the Israelites went astray from me are to come near to minister before me, before the Lord. Um, but you see, they cannot come up. And why? Because in verse 10 it said the Levites who went far away from me when Israel went astray, and who wandered from me after their idols must bear the consequences. So their consequences is to only do certain things. But the Zadoks are now in rule and in charge. Therefore, the law of sin and sacrifice, which was given 430 years when we were in Egypt for 430 years, that's the law that was suspended and not done away with, but will be re-implemented. Um, some believe in the millennial kingdom. And that is very important to note because people use the book of Corinthians in order to say that the law was done away with. And I needed to touch on that just so that we can begin to see that Passover is still to be taken the same way that it was instituted in the Old Testament, the same way that Christ took the Passover, the same way that the apostles took the Passover, the same way that the Passover was being taken all the way up until a lot of these councils began to come in. And so when we began to look at some further proof in history about how the Passover, how communion was changed, Guys, I'm so sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on with my connection. But it is very important to note that in the time of Daniel, when that Christ was quoting, that Antiochus Epiphanes was actually doing a lot and taking over during the captivities. And so at one point, the Grecians actually entered into the temple and sacrificed a pig on our altar. Okay. And so there was a lot that was going on that Christ was making and being made known of. But one thing that is not known by many is that our ancestors in the Bible really looked at the Roman Catholic Church as those who would come with the end time destructions. I will list down in the description below, but it's the fact that Caesar, I believe it's John 2. Let me see if it's not. Some Caesars were mentioned in the Bible. And so I'm going to pull up some facts on Augustus. And so Caesar Augustus was part of the Roman Empire and was one of the main four Roman emperors. And so as we see, his empire ran from Egypt. As we know, this was succumbed to the Byzantine Empire and to the Islamic conquest, which is why you see a lot of Islamics in Africa now. This was a Roman province in Croatia, Bosnia. But more importantly, look, in Africa, this is clear, even in Hispania. So when we began to even see that he was part of the Julian dynasty, which is very important to note because before we were on the Gregorian calendar, we were on the Julian calendar. And that's going to bring us to some more facts. So let's get into the fact that, as Survive the Jive was saying, let's go back to that. Hopefully it pulls up and play. But as he was saying, doing some of these rituals, even if the queen was not present to partake in these sexual acts with these horses, this was still given out.
So horse blood was sprinkled on the congregation at Yule so that the people there could all benefit from the sacrifice and share in its power with their king. The sharing and eating of the horse meat has the exact same function as the sprinkling of sacrificial blood. But King Haakon offended his people when he made the sign of the cross over the food, and then had to pretend he had only made the sign of Thor's hammer, lest the pagans grow violent. But he still wouldn't eat the horse meat, and this made them furious. The following year, they actually forced their own king to eat horse liver, and in another source, Orgrip, they threatened to drive the king from the throne if he would not eat the horse meat. Their absolute insistence on the king's participation in the rite, particularly the part where the horse meat is consumed and distributed.
Okay, so I'm going to put this video down below. It's a lot of information that's in this video. And so as you guys see, that's a Yule time ritual to take the horse's blood, to sprinkle it, sacrifice it, to consume the horse meat. And Yule time is during the winter solstice, during Saturnalia. This is during the time of Christmas, what Christians worship as the birthday of Mashiach. And so when we begin to get into the fact that we know that Christmas has absolutely nothing to do with the worship of Christ, with the birth of Christ, because you're not even supposed to worship him, with the birth of Christ. And I don't know if you guys remember, he mentioned the god Mithras. And Mithras, um, we'll talk about Mythras. I'm gonna do a whole video on a lot of these gods and a lot of these things so that we can begin to see exactly what's going on. And so when we begin to look at Nero Caesar as the Antichrist, is going to lead us. And so a lot, well, according to historians, they looked at Caesar as the Antichrist for several reasons. I mean, he went through burning and nailed Christians to crosses. And it was just something that was very, very, very tragic that was going on. But they also used gematria to begin to line up his name. And it says, as a popular belief in Nero's actual return. And so a lot of them believe that Nero died and that he will begin to come back and that he would be reincarnated because of all that he had done. And so this is linking what Christians or Israelites in the province of the East linked the Roman Catholic Church, just as the Apostle Paul did, to the beast system. Okay. I'm going to link all of this down below. And so by him being linked to the beast system, and we see that all of those providence that were taken over by Rome and the mention of Islam because of the Byzantine Empire, we have to begin to ask ourselves, where did Islam come from? Because Islam was not part of pre-Islamic Arabia. In pre-Islamic Arabia, they worship much like the Israelites of the Bible because the Most High is the God of the Hebrews. So that's so many, 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 many books. So now, where do we get the Eucharist from? And this is going to bring a lot of this to a head. Pause. So the Eucharist, also known as the Holy Communion and the Lord's Supper. And so this is elements of unleavened bread, elements of the Eucharist, unleavened bread, wine, an altar, communion table. And so this is the Catholic Church. And so this is very important for us to see. The Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox, Oriental, okay? The Eastern Orthodox Church, might as well just, this is the eastern leg of Rome. See? Constantinople. This is stuff that we really, really, really need to know. The majority of Eastern Orthodox Christians, from the Caucasus region, Cyprus, Georgia, Siberia, Russia, the Far East, and then it's going down into the Byzantine regions. The Byzantine regions is what's ruled by Islam, Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean. And so you see, and then you have the Western Orthodox. So the scripture that they use is the Septuagint, and that's the Greek rendition of the Old Testament. Okay. This goes very, very, very deep, because there were Israelites who spoke these languages because of the different captivities that we were under at that time. When you look into the Byzantine Rite, this is the Greek Rite. It's still Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Catholic Empire, and later the Roman Empire. We're going to learn on today. The Ottoman Empire is what needs to really, really, really be talked about. Let's go here. Because the Ottoman Empire ended in 1923. I'm not even going to try to Google it because my computer been tweaking. Oh, there you go, right here. Ottoman Empire, 1453 to 1922. And that leg of the Ottoman Empire remains in Arabia and Northeast Africa. So under the Ottoman Empire, what religion do you begin to have? Turkey is over 90% Islamic now. So when you look at the beast system, when you look at these pagan practices, you will begin to see that they are surrounding us, and we have been indoctrinated by my people from the beginning of time. So let's get into when the Passover was outlawed and how we ended up taking communion, which allows us to delve into these practices of the Celtics, these practices of the Romans. And because they mirror something that sounds like the Old Testament, we fall for it. Catechisms of the Catholic Church. This is them. This is what they say. This is their edict. This is what they have given us. The Holy Eucharist completes Christians' initiations, those who have been raised to the dignity and the royal priesthood by baptism and configured more deeply to Christ in the confirmation. And so they talking about the Last Supper. And I'm gonna link this down below, but I wanna get into it because y'all need to know these facts. I'm gonna just type this in because I do not see the link, or I could just give you guys the date and then link it down below. That's what I do. So in 325 AD, guess what was outlawed? And here goes my computer tweaking again. This is crazy. This never really happens, but I'm continuing talking because I believe it's still recording. So in 325 AD, Passover became outlawed. It became illegal. So in 3rd and 4th century Christianity, you begin to have some Israelites over in Eurasia spreading the gospel, mixing and mingling with pagans and their rituals. So when we begin to look at Roman Catholicism and why they replaced the Eucharist, why they replaced Passover for the Eucharist. Y'all seen them taking the Eucharist before. It looks just like the the video that I was playing. This is Celtic customs. And so then when we look into the fact that this all leads back to phallic worship during the Yule time, and when you look at the practices even in Mesopotamia, when you look at the tree of life, quote unquote, or the pineal cone, and the worship of the phallic amongst Semiramis and Nimrod, we will see that this leads us back to sun worship. And the Celtics would take the phallic of the horses and wrap them in onions and make them hard and use them as toys. The sex toy industry is booming right now, and it actually did not start booming in the United States until the 1970s. It was something that was developing in the 1800s, used to treat impotency and to be massage therapists, and a lot of this actually end up originating in Japan and in China, and they had phallic symbol worship amongst them as well. And so when we began to use these inordinate objects to find pleasure as women and as men too, we must realize that what we are doing is pagan in origin, and we begin to take place in these practices, that this practice goes to a deity, that it begins to go up to a god. And when we begin to even look at the fact that marriage is a covenant, and that sex is a covenant, and that worship goes unto something, because you're coming together and you're making a union, even if you are alone. That's why a lot of African cultures believe in spirit husbands and spirit wives. So when our grandmothers and our great grandmothers say that they dreamt of fish, it's because these fish deity ruled over the seas. When you look into Tiamat with the ancient Mesopotamians, or you look at Dagon when it comes to I believe the ancient Philistines, or when you look into Yamaja when it comes to Europe and the Orishas, so on and so forth, you begin to see that these fish deities, or even on the back of the cars with these fish symbols, it all leads to something. And so when we look into the Nicholsian Council, there we go. I hope the computer don't start tweaking again. If it does, like I said once before, I have the articles. When we look into the Nicholsian Council in 325 AD, we will see that this is when Passover was outruled. During the first 3 centuries of the church, it was frequently required under persecution. And so we'll see that Easter was instituted. Because they worshiped Easter, and we had Passover, and this is just literally what it was. The Nicholsian Council had grave effects, and they changed doctrine. They created the Trinity, established the equality of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Like, they made the doctrine of incarnate Jesus, that he was in existence, in analogical existence, before they took the book of John and said in the beginning was the word. And they, it's a lot of things that happened in the Nicholsian Council, so that our doctrine as Israelite could line up with the practices of these people. And so when we see the modern wave of femininity and feminism, that's when this worship really came back into play. And so the Greek god Mithras was mentioned. And that's why a lot of people do not adhere to the New Testament, because when they read it, they see Mithras present. They see and Mithras was a Zoroaster deity, and Zoroastrianism was present in Second Temple Babylonian Persian worship of the Israelites. And so I'm going to close out this video, and hopefully some of you, I know some people that's going to watch it full through, because a lot of people enjoy learning things. But for me, it was important to make this video so that I can begin to tackle and to just talk to us about some things that we may do in private that can and will have some spiritual effects, but also to begin to shed light on the fact that a lot of things that we do are not part of our culture. I'm going to link down below some articles that horses was not even in Africa and in ancient Mesopotamia. They were being domesticated in Eurasia in those times of the 3000 BC to 25,000 BC, when we were building up the Ubed culture in ancient Sumeria, and when we were going down into Haran. So we were not sacrificing horses and chopping off their phallics and using them as dildos and going under white covers and things of that nature. And so I just want us to be aware of exactly what it is that we are doing when we say that we are self gratifying, realizing that we are really attaching ourselves to these deities. And even when we go to church on these Sunday mornings, specifically during the YULE time, and we begin, and Pentecost Sunday, because I know that that's a Sunday that people begin to take communion as well. And if we look into the practice of the Druids, of the Celtics, and know that when they do these things, that they are worshiping the phallic, that they are worshiping the sun god. I hope that I said something today to begin to shine some light on something, to begin to kind of tantulate our thoughts and open up our mind and our psyche, our soul, our body, and our spirit, so that we can begin to detach from this world and from these cultures. And also, I'm gonna just link everything down below. If there's a subject matter that you guys want to discuss or talk about, please reach out to me via email at tierraholiday@yahoo.com, TIERRAHOLLIDAY. Also, remember, the law of sin and sacrifice was given 430 years after we were in Egypt. And that was the law that was given for guilt. It's called the guilt law. And I believe that is listed in Leviticus, the 7th chapter, for those of you who may feel as if the law has been done away with. I hope I've been thorough enough on this video. Kept it as short as possible. I know it's a little lengthy for some, but my audience know who they are. I'll break up some small videos sooner than later. This is Jacolia of Jacolia Gems signing out. If you have not already done so, go ahead and like the video, comment, share this on your social media platforms, and above all else, subscribe for me. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.